We have a great deal to learn from Scandinavia and a great deal to be alarmed at from the Mediterranean by Gore Vidal. No event is complete without a prayer. Let's bow down our heads in reverence. Almighty God, we thank you for this day that you have given us. As we gather together, we praise you for this day and your purpose for it. Bless our moderator, Mr. Taha, and our panelists so they may deliver their content in the way they intended it to be delivered. We thank you for every seat that has been filled up today. Guide them and shower your blessings upon them. Reset our agendas as we sit in your presence. We pray that we have this session, you will give us a time of fellowship and friendship for now and the time ahead. We pray for the smooth functioning of the event and for your blessings and mercy upon us throughout this day. Give us cheerful spirit even when things don't go our way. In your name we pray. Amen. The secret of getting ahead is getting started. Good morning, everyone. I, Akanksha, Assistant Coordinator on behalf of Comverse, welcome you to our 14th episode, Scandinavian Economy, a brief look through. Comverse is a discussion forum organized by the Department of Commerce. Comverse was started with an intention to improve public speaking and debating skills among the students of BCom department. The association would organize panel discussions on current affairs where the students themselves are the panelists to present complicated and intricate matters through easily understandable mediums by holding discussions about various topics that pique the interest of general population. The conversations are undertaken in the form of panel discussion and therefore deliver exposure to all the members who participate and attend the sessions. The sessions are also uploaded onto the YouTube channel of the institution to allow students on campus to view and refer the videos on specific topics as and when required and can be viewed by the future batches. A warm welcome to our principal, Reverend Dr. Charles Lasrado, SJ, our HOD, Dr. Suganti Pius, our staff coordinator, Ms. Irene Vincent, faculty professors, and all the students. I would like to warmly welcome our moderator for the day, Mr. Taha Syed. Mr. Taha Syed is an alumni of SJCC. He's a man with the aim of being a portfolio manager. Mr. Taha is best example to prove how theoretical knowledge can be portrayed practically. Problem solving, creative thinking, analytical thinking, communication, equity trading, financial analysis, and interpersonal skills. He's a person who has dedication towards his work, and his word of commitment is appreciable. He has been an active member in his college alumni associations and has organized various events. He was an active member of the former associations, that is Choir, IMT, Hashmi Theatre, CSA, NSS, BBA Festing Team, and Connexus. And he has won a number of national and one international awards that cover St. Xavier's College, Mumbai, St. Aloysius College, Mangalore, Jain University, Christu Jayanti, and led the first international team for the event at Boston College, Nepal. Mr. Taha has been HR event head for Cypher and Chanakya for 2 years and has judged various events that includes Moot Court, Lakshya 2019, Turas 2020 and 2021, Aura 2020, Cypher 2019 and 2021. Welcome, Mr. Taha. Episode 14, Scandinavian Economy, a brief look through. Scandinavian economy, because why not? We are discussing about Scandinavian countries because they aren't often in the limelight. Their policies are very unique and efficient. They lead in terms of citizen happiness and being sustainable, among others. We felt that their economy and their ways should be brought to your attention. Now, we may kickstart the panel discussion with Ms. Shloka on your left from 1 BCom D, Mr. Ved Gopinath from 2 BCom C. Then we have Mr. Kunal Bohra from 3 BCom E and Mr. Taha Syed, our moderator. And then we have Lalit Dash from 3 BCom A and Kaushik from 2 BCom A and Maria from 2 BCom C. Now I officially hand over the discussion to Mr. Taha.
Good morning, one and all present here. First and foremost, thank you so much, Akansha, for such a lovely introduction. I must say it's always a pleasure to be back at Joseph's, and I feel extremely honored to moderate the 14th edition of Converse. Without any further delay, let's dive right straight into it. And today's topic for panel discussion is Scandinavian economy, a brief look through. Scandinavia refers to a region in Northern Europe which basically comprises of countries such as Denmark, Norway, and Sweden. In broader sense, and in a narrow sense, it also refers to the countries of Iceland and Finland as well. What we'll be essentially discussing today is the economic model followed by these countries, also known as the Nordic model. The countries that follow this model, such as Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, enjoy high securities such as the social security system, free healthcare, free education, and a guaranteed pension payments. So as we glance through the economies of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, I would like to ask our first panelist of the day, Kunal, to speak something regarding these three economies.
Yes, thank you, Taha. So let us understand how these three economies came into being. So Norway was a fishing community initially in the 18th and the 19th century. So what really turned their fortunes around was oil discovery. So around 60 years ago, they found oil reserves of their shores. They nationalized it. Now, being a part of NATO really helped Norway because USA did not apply sanctions being an ally. And at that time, the government knew that oil money won't last forever. So they created a sovereign wealth fund, which amounts to around $1.3 trillion. It's the largest of its kind. And the portfolio they have invested into is very diversified. So what this leads to is that the income of Norway does not depend on their economy. Even if the economy is not doing well, the sovereign wealth fund will continue generating income for them. So this is a very unique and amazing thing done by Norway. Now Sweden wasn't so fortunate with oil, but they really worked hard. They have had a lot of up and downs, and they always upgraded themselves. They have changed their policies. Sweden's economy really took off during the Industrial Revolution when they supplied a lot of iron ore and metal, etc. And since Sweden is also a cold country, they couldn't rely on agriculture. So this helped in massive industrialization, which they eventually specialized in. Now, Denmark has been doing some amazing things for a long time. They have a very robust education system since the 16th century. And they always update it to make sure that the education meets the industry standards. So this coupled with free education has really helped create a specialized workforce. Specialized workforce coupled with your specialized industry really helped Denmark to increase their GDP by a huge margin. Now, coming to certain similarities, all these three countries are socialists with a hint of capitalism. However, Norway has a lot of enterprises that are state-owned, unlike Sweden and Denmark, which don't have that many state-owned corporations. So Norway has done this to ensure that they regulate the corporate sector through shares and not through regulations, which have been proven really helpful. Another important system that they have is the tripartism, where the union, the employees, as well as the corporations, they discuss and they form policies. So this way, no one is exploited and it's beneficial for all.
So based on what Kunal spoke, I couldn't help but notice the similarities between two countries, that is Norway and Venezuela. Both these countries were fortunate enough to find oil reserves within their vicinity. But what has been happening with these two countries, basically with the economy of these two countries, is something that can be looked upon. So Kunal, do you think that a comparison can be drawn between the economies of Norway and Venezuela?
Yes, that's a very interesting observation, Taha. So Venezuela and Norway both had an average per capita GDP, but when they found oil, they both dealt it in very different ways. Norway was the person who won the lottery, but still kept his day job and invested. Whereas Venezuela was the guy who partied and made headlines, but ultimately he ended up in debt. So the Venezuelan government at that time, they wanted to please the public. So what they did was, they did have a state-owned corporation like Norway did, but it wasn't well run. There was misappropriation of funds, there was corruption and inefficiency. So their income from oils reduced. On top of that, unlike these three countries which have a very high income tax rate and tax on goods and services, Venezuela lowered the tax to bare minimum. In some years, the citizens of Venezuela didn't even pay taxes. So this further decreased the amount that the government was getting. And the government also, they literally went on the street and they threw money around because they wanted to please people that much. And by this, you get a fair idea of how much money Venezuela was making. So they also invested into non-revenue generating assets like fountains and parks, etc. So this led to an inflation, and that also reduced their bargaining power with corporates. So Norway, instead, they created a wealth fund. They are wealthy. They can bargain with the corporates. They can deal with them directly. So this has led to the tripartism system, as I mentioned earlier. Singapore has been has developed on this system. So these are the comparisons between these two economies.
Thank you for the insights, Kunal. So as we glance through the economies of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, one thing which strikes us is these countries have a very high taxation system. But in spite of this, they have been able to demonstrate a steady economic growth. So I would like to ask our second panelist, Lalit, to tell us something about the same topic, that is, how these countries are able to display a strong economic growth despite having some of the highest taxation systems in the world.
Well, if you see, the Scandinavian countries rank to be one of the top tax-paying countries among all the world. Among all the countries in the entire nation, and because of this, they have prospered in a lot of ways. But the tax system is split into three major parts, which is childcare programs, leave of absence, and free healthcare systems. This was all done because of a legal framework that was kept in 1990s, which helped the Scandinavian economies prosper in terms of their taxation part. But one thing that people don't know is that the majority chunk of their tax, so let's say if they're paying 60% income tax, in that 25% goes towards employer social security contribution. Now, what do I mean by employer social security contribution is, let's say I'm talking about your infrastructure development, talking about your free healthcare programs, talking about your free education for your children. All this comes under social security contributions, apart from, of course, the security reasons, which I don't need to mention. But this gives the sense of assurity to the citizens that even if anything happens to my family or to me, I don't need to worry. And that is why they end up paying so much of tax happily. US also pays income tax, personal income tax, around 14%. Sweden in particular pays 17%. But then the main gap happens to the employer social security contribution, right? And back in 1991, Sweden also initiated the right to leave of absence act. What does this mean is basically that they encourage people to take up businesses, they encourage people to start their own startups, and that is why Sweden is also called the startup capital of the world. And because of this, people have the assurity that if anything happens to me and at the end of the day, I have a roof, or let's say like I have food to eat, and the government will take care of me. And this only happens through transparency.
So in addition to what Lalit just spoke, I think another important factor that needs to be considered is that of corruption. These three countries have consistently ranked as the least corrupt and the most transparent countries in the world. In fact, according to the Corruption Perception Index, Denmark has consistently ranked as the least corrupt and the most transparent countries in the world. So we can do a correlation here, and I would like to ask Lalit. Lalit, do you think that low corruption coupled with high taxes is a good recipe for an egalitarian society?
Well, absolutely yes. It is the perfect example or the perfect mixture for the egalitarian society. But also one more part is that Sweden wouldn't have prospered without its people. Now, there's a strong reason why I said people is because the population of the Norwegian countries, or let's say Scandinavian countries, is very less. And this increases the transparency between the government and the people. Right? So what happens when transparency increases is that you know where your money is going. So that is why people are happily pouring out, or let's say happily giving out a higher rate of income tax to the government, because they know that they are being given so and so benefits, right? And Finland is of course, the Scandinavian countries come among the top happiest countries in the world. It's also because they are receiving so many benefits, right? 15% of their time, 15 and a half hours out of their entire day goes towards them. Now, what I mean by this is that they are encouraged to take programs where they can recuperate themselves, they can enjoy doing something. So these are things that keep people very happy. And at the same time, the infrastructure itself was developed way back in 1990s or 1980s so that the people could receive benefits now. So of course, less corruption rate and high income tax leads to an egalitarian society.
Thank you for your insights, Lalit. Another important factor or criteria where these countries have been doing extremely well is the ease of doing business. In fact, these countries consistently rank high when it comes to the ease of doing index as well. And I would like to ask Ved, our third panelist, to tell us something about the ease of doing business in these countries and how these countries have been promoting entrepreneurship for a while now.
All right, sure, not an issue. So I'm going to keep my answer short. So short, in fact, that it can all be summed up in just one word, and that word is sustainability. So you see, everywhere else in the world, you have governments and countries, trying to make their current financial systems seem way better than they actually are. And the reason they do this is basically to bait investors, to invest in their own economy. But this is not the case in Scandinavian countries. You see, Scandinavians, they understand that the government plays a very important part in hosting businesses, and businesses play an equally important part in giving back to the government. And one country which understood this really well was Sweden. So as Lalit already told, Sweden is the startup capital of the world, and only because of its stable government and ridiculously low levels of corruption. And it's a perfect combination of these two. So Sweden is basically like a fresh meal just waiting to be eaten. Now what I mean by this is that it's a chain reaction. So this is how it works. So you have a very stable government, and now because of the stability of this government, you have investors all over the world moving their funds into the economy of this government. So this new investor capital is used to fund many projects, many businesses, many startups. Okay, and all these business and startups, they just employ more people from the country, which increases their standard of living, per capita income, even the GDP of the whole country. Now, the sudden growth of economy and increase in the GDP of the country, what it does is it promotes more investors into investing in its economy. So yeah, you can see how this chain reaction works and how well these countries have harnessed it. Now, the Scandinavian countries, they go even a step further by providing unbelievable benefits to both the business owners and the workers. Their short working hours and mandatory vacation days are a no-brainer to work there. So you're getting the same benefit with half the cost that you're going to take. So yeah, so it's a no-brainer as to why these countries rank so high in the World Happiness Report by the United Nations every year.
So in addition to what Ved spoke, it would again not come as a surprise that some of the best brands that we know today, such as H&M or Volvo or Ericsson, have been based out of Sweden. And not just these big companies, but the recent big names such as Spotify or Truecaller, these companies also have been originated from Sweden. So it would be safe to assume that, the entrepreneurship is directly linked to a country's development. In fact, according to a recent survey, the countries which consistently rank higher with respect to the startup ecosystem, such as UK, China, or USA, have shown great deal of economic growth as well. So again, my question would be to Ved. Ved, what do you think is the correlation between entrepreneurship in a country and its development with respect to it?
That's a very interesting question. So I'd like to answer that with an analogy. So I'd like all of you to think of entrepreneurship as a parasite and a country as its host. So let's take out the good and evil out of the equation for a moment and just focus on functionality. So what does a parasite do? It basically goes around looking for the perfect host, one in where it can survive, sustain, and even grow to a point where it can accommodate more of itself. And the more this happens, as a process, the whole organism gets stronger as a unit. So now back to basics. Entrepreneurship, Taha, is a very crucial, if not the most crucial tool in the development of a country solely because of the concept of selfless growth. Now, what do I mean by selfless growth? So right now, as of this moment, we have a whole generation of individuals going into the workforce, with the sole intention of earning a buck for themselves. So this is a very toxic environment, for the growth of a country as a whole, because no one is looking out for each other. Now, you won't face this problem in the Scandinavian countries, especially with entrepreneurship, because in a business, it's not only the owner that gets the benefit, but the benefit is also endowed upon the people, many people that he or she employs. Now, entrepreneurship also goes to the extent of helping the rural parts of the country, especially when they set up their factories or businesses in rural and developing areas. So what this does is they basically employ people below the poverty line and they get paid for their labor or for even unskilled workers. So this on a very large scale, what it does, it makes sure they are not below the poverty line anymore. They get more benefits. They have a discretionary income after all. Okay, and then overall, this over a large scale, you have more per capita income and the overall GDP grows of the country. And lastly, the most important point of entrepreneurship is its forward and backward linkages. Now, this might sound, it might not, but it might sound like a little complicated term. I want to explain it with an example. Let's say I'm an entrepreneur. I want to start manufacturing cars. So I will need a steel plant to manufacture cars. Now, just for this one car or for this one factory of steel plants, I will need a rubber factory for the tires of the cars. I need glasses for the windows. I need alloys, to weld the cars. I need nuts and bolts to assemble all of this. So do you see what's happening here? Just me being an entrepreneur wanting to manufacture cars, I have so many more supporting businesses on the side. And each of these businesses, they employ more and more people. And you can see this on a large scale, how much it impacts a whole nation. You have so many more people, getting jobs, so many more products being produced. So the whole GDP of the country increases, which in turn causes more investors to invest in the country's economy. So yeah, I'd say entrepreneurship is a very crucial, if not the most crucial tool in economic development of a country, because it's the only one which compounds growth. I don't see anything else which is as selfless as entrepreneurship, because nowhere else are you going to find a compounding effect that you're going to find in entrepreneurship. Yep.
Thank you for your insights, Wade. It's interesting to note that these countries have not just been doing remarkably well when it comes to entrepreneurship or economic growth, but they also seem to be the world leaders when it comes to climate change and environmental protection. I've been saying this because due to the recent spur of incentives provided by the Norwegian government, the market share for electric vehicles in Norway has skyrocketed from just 0.7% in 2010 to 75% in 2020. So, what are the factors which have contributed to this? This is something I would like to ask Kaushik to answer.
Thank you, Mr. Taha, for that. So, I would like to start off by saying that what Norway has become today in terms of the global frontrunners in the electric vehicle market, it's something that inspires the whole world, and all of them look up to it, look up to them to kind of at least if not replicate the model which we will talk about later, they at least kind of do their part on the environment. It brings a sense of sustainability in each and every country. Now I'll take you through the short a chronology of what actually Norway did, and this all started back in 1990s, as Lalit also said. 1990 was a very crucial year for the Scandinavian economy, and a lot of policy formations happened, including the fact that Norway looked at sustainability on the long run, something that actually matters to the future and the change for the greater good. So right from 1990, they've been looking at monetary and financial benefits and non-financial as well. So the financial benefits include stuff, policies such as tax exemptions and something like clear tax exemptions. Because first, of course, it did start off with a 10%, a 25%, and later a 50% by 2015. But right now, Norway are aiming at something like a 90% or 100% tax exemption. So basically, any private owner of an electric vehicle is completely exempted from tax. And now let me go for the bridge. So this was on the consumer's end. Now to the business. This is a win-win situation for both the entrepreneurs and the consumers. So, as Wade stated, it's a very safe environment for entrepreneurs as well, because in one of his interviews, the remarkable Elon Musk, he was stating the fact that the companies who actually produce EVs and even promote them in the their market share are totally exempted from VAT, and this is exceptional because even it gives a motivation for other businesses to come as well. And it's not only Tesla, but there are the models of Nissan Leaf 3 and Volkswagen Golf that have actually picked up very well in Norway. Although it's Tesla that's been the roadrunner since 2018, where more than 54% of the cars are Tesla right now in Norway. Let me take you to the fact that of the sales of electric vehicles, as you said, there's a 75% market share, which is a whopping amount. So, again, chronologically going, 2012, April 2012 was the first time Norway actually saw 10,000 electric vehicles registered. And one thing we should all learn from Norway as humans and as the whole world is that we should never look back at anything. Because since then, it's just been going up and up. It's been skyrocketing, as you stated. So April 2012 was the first time 10,000 EVs were registered. Now the figures are going to really astonish you for the fact that there was a slow growth. In 2016, 50,000 EVs were registered. And since then, in 2017, there were 100,000, and in 2018, 200,000, and 2020, 300,000. So this is something I don't think any other country has been able to, even project in terms of growth trajectory with respect to electric vehicles. And this is purely because of the fundamental environmental math that the government has also done, relating to the fact that incentives actually help a lot. And one last point I would like to cover before I wrap up is because of these amazing due initiatives relating to financial and non-financial incentives from the government, it's definitely been a great toll on the sustainability of the earth. A positive toll, because how CO2 emissions are actually measured is there's a unit called gram per kilometer. And this is something like, how many grams of carbon dioxide is actually emitted in the atmosphere per kilometer run by each of the car. And this was 132 G by km, gram by kilometer back then in 2012 when 10,000 EVs were only there. And now it's drastically plummeted for the good, and it's only 29 G per km. So that's something very, very commendable the Norway government has done, and the citizens of Norway too. Yeah.
You're right, Kaushik. It's indeed remarkable that Norway has been able to do what it has been able to do. But what else is astonishing is that in addition to the 75% market share of electric vehicles in the Norway market, 98% of the electricity that Norway produces comes from renewable sources of energy. So, as quoted by their Prime Minister, the model that Norway has been able to produce will be very difficult to replicate elsewhere in the world. So, do you have any thoughts regarding that?
Yeah, so this is it goes without saying that for the facts and figures that I've stated, no other country looks at replicating it now. As Kunal had stated before, Norway was predominantly an oil giant first, but they also saw that they saw a very good future in clean green energy at a very early stage. And as you said, 98% is actually released from hydropower. So it's basically a renewable source of energy given to a renewable cost, that is for running electric vehicles, which an added incentive is that they have free parking and they can run on bus ferries as well for faster commute. And so putting all these factors together with free charging as well, it's something like a renewable source for a renewable cost. And that's something Norway has beautifully done. Talking about the other two Scandinavian economies here, I'm not too sure about Denmark in this place because they're still lagging behind in terms of renewable energy and EVs. But Sweden has remarkably, drastically made a difference here because right now Sweden has actually seen the cause for clean energy right now, and the fact that they can harness renewable sources. And by 2040, they're definitely looking at a good space to be where Norway is now. And if you take the big countries, this is my last point, so I'll just finish up. If you look at the big countries like India, US, and China, a lot of their their energy still comes from non-renewable sources. And in India, it's a whopping 72%, if I'm not wrong, where it comes from coal and other non-renewable sources. So, this is going to be very hard unless India finds a really good source to harness renewable sources of energy. Because if you keep renewing from non-renewable sources, I mean, if you keep pulling out energy from non-renewable sources for the cause of something like electric vehicles, in the long run, there's even if it's 100% market share in India, I don't think there's going to be great cause or futuristic sustainable provisions, which Norway actually has been looking at and doing from a very early stage. So I hope that answers.
That absolutely answers my questions. Thank you for the insights. You did also mention that Sweden has been facing an energy crisis with respect to the supply and demand. So it's an interesting point here is that these countries are very small when it comes to the land they have. So it's obvious they have limited resources. So way these countries have been tackling their immigration problems also seems to be something that has to be discussed. So I would like to ask Shloka to tell us something about the immigration policies of these countries.
Thank you, sir. So, since 1990s, the Scandinavian countries have been diverging into several immigration policies. So, these policies have been restrictive on some countries and not as much on the others. So, if you take the example of Denmark, Denmark has the most restrictive policies in terms of immigrants. Sweden, however, has the most liberal. Now, when we take the case of Norway, Norway lies in between. However, it inclines more to the Danish model. So, especially since like 2001, Denmark has this integration policy which has tightened the asylum rights, which has not given social benefits to their immigrants. It's made it much harder for them to get citizenship in the country. So, every other country compared to Denmark is less restrictive. Like if you take the case of Norway, there is a policy that is called the mandatory immigration program, which makes it very hard for them to get the citizenship simply because they have to write citizenship tests as well as language tests. And language, obviously, in a Scandinavian country is a huge barrier even for employment. Sweden, on the other hand, is obviously very liberal. However, only in the case of the refugee crisis, which took place in about 2015-16, was there a real problem. Because the population started seeing that there was a large inflow of these immigrants, and obviously they weren't happy with the situation. So only during that time did they actually tighten their asylum rights. Now if I go into the anti-immigration policy in particular in Denmark, it is a policy that you wouldn't think would exist in a country like Denmark. Because as Lalit mentioned, it is one of the most positive countries and happiest countries in the world. It revokes the refugee rights. If I take the example of a Syrian citizen who now has to be deported back to Syria simply because they're not given their Danish citizenship, results in them not having a place to go in any European country. It's basically illegal. So the main question arises, if they can't reside in Denmark, where do they go? Denmark, however, has come up with a humane situation where they imply that they're going to be transporting these immigrants into third world countries. However, this entire situation is very theoretical because there's no third world country in particular that has come front and volunteered to take in these immigrants. There is also another situation in mind, which is deporting them to islands outside of the Denmark territory. There is an example of an island which is called the Lindholm Island. However, a very important factor is that it's called it's been given the nickname of virus. The reason is because all these research programs were taking place in this particular island, and this has resulted in swine flu tracks still staying in the island. This obviously does not make it the most viable situation for a country for immigrants to reside in. And also a situation like this had taken place in Australia, but it went against all the human rights of the people, making it not the most viable situation.
So you did mention something about Denmark's anti-immigration policy. In fact, I was just scrolling through my YouTube and I saw that there have been a lot of protests with respect to this. So can you tell us something about the backlash that Denmark has been facing with respect to its anti-immigration policy?
when it comes to the protests, so the opinions of the public in Denmark, that is the locals, is very polarized. There's one section of the population that says that it's a good thing to get these refugees in, while the others are very against it. So keeping public opinion away, Denmark also has international headlines claiming that they're this positive country. So obviously the first question that would come to your mind would be, if Denmark is such a happy country, why is it that they're destroying the lives of the most brutalized people in the world? The answer is pretty simple. Denmark is a country with a special case. They have completely opted out of this migration acquis. This means that they're not obliged to follow anything that goes under it. However, they still follow the Treaty of the Charter of Human Rights, and that's all that matters.
Based on what you just spoke, it comes as no surprise that a lot of migrants want to emigrate to Denmark and the other Scandinavian countries. And why wouldn't they? Because these countries have consistently ranked very high when it comes to Human Development Index. In fact, Denmark has consistently ranked again in the top 10, and the other countries also have been ranking in the top 5. In fact, Norway has been the top 1 when it comes to Human Development Index. So I would like to ask Maria that what are her views regarding this, that it's a no-brainer that a good labor policy translates to a very good Human Development Index ranking. So what are your views regarding this?
So the Scandinavian labor model, it has a special feature called as flexicurity, in which employers, they can hire and fire employees to adjust to the needs of the marketplace. And in return, employees have a safety security net like unemployment insurance fund, government training sessions, etc. in between jobs. Now, working hours and wages are based on collectively negotiated agreements. These agreements are negotiated between employer organizations and trade unions. This model has been working really well in this economy, mainly because of the trade unions, as they have a huge part in securing fair wages and good working conditions for the employees. Now, this model, it faces a very concerning problem, and that is a change in demographic factors, that is the rise in aging population. So the reason for the rise in aging population is because of low fertility rates and high life expectancy. Now, what this does is it imposes a welfare burden on the government and on employees in the labor market. So Norway, they were pretty clever about this. They tried to solve this problem by amending their private sector pension policy, which is also known as AFP. Now, why they did this is to encourage senior Norwegians to stay in employment. So this could avoid employee scarcity. So what they basically did in this amendment is they removed mean testing. So means testing is the ability of a person to afford their basic needs. So if you're poorer, the more pension benefits you get. Once they removed this means testing, people could claim their pension benefits and still continue to work at the same time. So this decreased their welfare burden on the government as well as the scarcity of employees. Now, people who claimed their pension at 62, the percentage, it rose from 30% to 50%, but there were also people who claimed their pension and continued to work, and this shot up to 13%. Now, what this did is it broke the connection between filing for pension and stopping to work at the same time. There were people who claimed it and continued to work. And besides this, globalization, so the labor model has made globalization more palatable for its employees. Okay, it helps them to take part or adjust to trade impacts and technological changes. Now, what this does is it creates confidence in them to that if their present job is not there, another job will arise in its place.
So, based on what Maria just spoke, I think we can draw a very interesting correlation between the labor policy of a country and its productivity. Because, again, looking at the statistics and the rankings, these three countries have been consistently ranking as some of the most productive countries in the world. So, do you think there exists a correlation between a good labor policy and the productivity of a country?
That's a very interesting question. As facts suggest, Norway, Denmark, and Sweden are in the top 12 most productive countries in the world, and that's mainly because of their labor policies. Their labor policies, they support quality education and training as well as technological advancements. If you see in the quality education and training, government provides retraining programs and counseling sessions to get unemployed people back to work as quick as possible. And in Sweden, people who are employed for more than 6 months are allowed to take a break, a leave of absence for education purposes, and when they are done, the job will still be waiting for them. So with this job security and massive opportunities due to globalization, people are confident that they will progress in that employee labor model. So due to this, their labor productivity increases. Thank you.
Thank you for the insights, Maria. So that brings us to the end of today's panel discussion. And now we'll be headed towards the question and answers session. So if anybody in the audience has any question for our panelists, they can directly ask them. Just make sure that, hold on. So just make sure that you refrain from any political or controversial questions, okay? Yeah. Can I have a volunteer? Just give him a mic.
Hey, my question is to Ved. What are the benefits of working in these countries?
You're talking about Norwegian and Scandinavian, right? Alright, so it's pretty simple. Do you remember, Vijay, do you remember previously when I compared these two, entrepreneurship to a parasite and a country to a host? Yeah, so it's as important for the country to be a good host that it is for the business to give back to the government. So I'll explain it in 2 points. The first benefit that you're going to see starting a business over here is lack of holdups and levels of bureaucracy. Now what this basically means, I'll give you a simple example. I applied for my voter's ID around 4 months ago. Every time I check the website, it says awaiting, processing, okay? I still haven't received it, and I have no clue at which stage it is. Is it going to get shipped? Is it already done? Is it printed? Now imagine if I was running a business and I was applying for licenses and certificates. 4 months wait, the market might change in 4 months. You might not get funding in 4 months. So you cannot afford to have these holdups, especially if you're running a business. So you won't face any of these problems while working or starting a business in Scandinavian countries. Now secondly, and the more important benefit, is the benefit to entrepreneurs. So a lot of you in the audience, you're college students, obviously, and most of you must have startup ideas of your own. So I'm sure all of you might have thought of starting on it, but I'm also sure that if you told your parents, Ma, I want to drop out of college and work on the startup idea, their reaction wouldn't be very positive. Now, why do you think that is? The only answer is security. They'll ask you 2 questions. Number 1, where are you going to get the money from for the startup? Secondly, even if you do get the money, what are you going to do once the startup fails? So now for me, starting a business, if I want to give 100% to a business, I'm more worried about, getting money, putting food over the table, having a roof over our heads, than actually focusing on the business. So now I'll tell you the situation if you're in Norway. Let's say you're working a corporate job and you want to start a business over there. The corporation gives you a 6 months paid leave for you to work on your business altogether. You don't have to worry about expenses, food, roof over your head, because it's a 6 months paid leave. And connecting to Lalit's point, they are able to do this because a part of the 6 months paid leave is subsidized by the high taxes that they pay. So you get a 6 months paid leave just for working on your ideas, okay? And because it's a small business that you're starting up with, you get a lot of grants and exemptions from the government, okay? And then after these 6 months, let's say your idea still fails. Highly possible, let's say it still fails. Okay, now even after this, you can still go back to your old job. So they have this open time frame. So you as an entrepreneur, you're more focused on your business than actually focused on everything else around it. So yeah, so these are a few benefits you get working in these countries among many. I hope I've answered your question.
All right, very interesting take, Ved. So does anybody else have any questions?
My question is to Lalit. So, have the high social security contributions led to, high income taxes paid by the citizens?
Well, absolutely yes, because the only reason they are able to provide so many benefits to their citizens is because of the tax contributions, right? Even back in 1992, as I mentioned before, the Right to Leave Act, the Leave of Absence Act, which even Ved spoke about right now, is only being paid through the income tax contributions that people have done. Specifically, I'll give you one interesting fact also. Before the whole digitalization, the internet revolution started in 1980, specifically in Stockholm. Sweden government made sure that they spread out dark fiber network throughout the city. Now, what happens is this encouraged people to buy PCs, laptops, and work or like be computer literate. This is what Sweden said, and this was only possible because of a foresight. Same thing. The reason why they are not able to, or let's say like any country is not able to catch up at Sweden's pace, or let's say any Norwegian country's pace in for adopting an electric vehicle, is because they had a foresight. And all these foresights were possible because of their income tax payments. I can go on, but there are a lot more things can speak about, but yeah, time constraint is a problem.
If that doesn't answer your question, he can speak more. Do you want him to speak more?
All right. Okay, fine. I'll take it as a 1 minute. Is that fine? Yeah. All right. One more factor is a small thing. It's a very small thing that people usually neglect and they don't pay attention to. A lot of people in Norway use bicycles to go to office, to commute to work, etc. Now, the Norwegian government realized that a lot of people were coming very sweaty to the office, right? So what they did is they installed the electric rail uphill, so that the passengers, or let's say the cyclists, all they need to do is keep their leg on the right side, and the electric rail takes them up. So it makes your work easier, but you're using a cycle or using a public transport, right? So again, these kind of things are what Sweden government, or let's say the Norwegian governments, take care of their employees, and it all comes down to the money that you're giving. And I also mentioned about transparency. You know that you're paying, let's say, 100 rupees to the government right now, and you know you will receive benefits of 90 rupees. Of course, like the 10 rupees will go somewhere else, but this assurity is only possible through a framework, or let's say the legalities that they have set up long back, and it's only possible because of that, nothing else.
All right. Do you have anyone else in the audience? Yeah.
So my question is to Kunal. Yeah. So I want to know how free education has benefited the economies of these countries.
Yes, thank you. That's a very relevant question because free education has been the driving force behind all these three countries. As I mentioned before, education has been free in these three countries for a long time. And they have always ensured that the education that they give out is very relevant to the industry according to the current standards. So this has led to people pursuing their tertiary degree as well. That is your PG and your master's, PhD, etc. And as a result, you have a highly specialized workforce. No matter which field you go to, you'll find very specialized people. That's why companies prefer coming here. And service has been a huge sector for all these three economies because they have been constantly evolving. Like I think in Denmark and Sweden, close to 60 or 70% of their GDP is from service, right? So this also ensures that there are many people in the workforce. Like Denmark, close to 80% of all eligible people, that is like 18 to 45, between the ages of 18 to 45, work. Now that's a huge amount considering other countries, which is, around 20, maybe even 30%, but it's not close to 100, like Denmark is. Now also, Lalit had mentioned about high tax rates, etc. So one of the reasons why tax rates are so high, because majority of a huge amount of the tax collected goes into education, right? And also what this has led to is a very high social mobility. That means it's easier to move between the strata of society. Like if you want to be in the high income, you can just pursue your education, you can pursue your master's, PhD, become specialized, and your income gets elevated. Right? Even if you don't want to pursue your tertiary degree, you can get a secondary degree, and you know that the welfare aspect of it is taken care of. So that case, you can even come in the lower, the middle strata. And as Kaushik had mentioned, that Denmark is lagging behind compared to Norway, right? Regarding hydroelectricity, etc. But what Denmark is doing pretty well is that the fossil fuels that they have they are utilizing it so well that before they used to export oil, but now they are supplying electricity to UK. And this wouldn't have been possible without education. And then we have Swedish brands like IKEA and Koenigsegg that produces hypercars. Right now, especially when it comes to cars, hypercars, aerodynamics, and you have your thermodynamics, etc., they play a huge role. And while the concept of these two might seem simple, but when it comes to practical applications, it's really different. And Denmark has ceramic speed, so they produce ball bearings. It might seem pretty simple, but they have specialized in that, and they are so good in that it's unparalleled. You can't find the same quality elsewhere in the world. Hope that answers your question. Yeah, thank you.
I think we have time for one more question. If anybody has any questions or... Yeah. Yeah, all right. Volunteer, can you please pass the mic?
Yeah, so my question is, anyone can answer. So, as you all know, Denmark, the Scandinavian countries have a very high tax rate, income tax rate. So, how do you think that such a high tax rate will help boost the, buying within the economy? And if there's no buying within the economy, what reason do other companies have to come to the country and set up businesses?
Actually, I think it can be answered by a couple of people here. You can give a joint answer if you want.
Yeah, sure. I think, Lalit will add on. So the question was about the purchasing power, right? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So, as you know, in these three countries, the income tax is very high, as you mentioned. And even, so according to that, even your take-home salary is very less. And the prices of goods are pretty high. So, the reason they still purchase is because they don't have to save up for education, they don't have to save up for medical. Like in US, a simple scan can cost you around 7 lakhs or something, like a CT scan. It can go up to 7 lakhs. But if you see the cost in India, it's around 9,000 rupees. But there, it's completely free. Plus, the standard of living is so high, you don't face any issues there. So, they don't really have to invest much in themselves. They know they'll be taken care of. They don't have to invest anywhere, like into stocks. They don't have to worry about their retirement because even old age is taken care of. There are old age homes that are funded. You'll get a pension, and that's way more than enough. So this comparatively leaves a huge chunk of your take-home salary that can be used to purchase things. So that's how the purchasing power is controlled, or it exists. Like people still want to buy because they know they'll be taken care of.
One more concept that a lot of people don't know is tax wedge. Now, what does tax wedge mean is that let's say like you're earning $76,000 annually, right? Your take-home pay will be 23,000. The rest of it goes to your social security contribution. Let's say like the income tax, right? And in that, it is split into 3 parts, which is your personal income tax, employee social security contribution, and employer social security contribution. Employer social security contribution takes 25%, which I mentioned in the start. And the points that I mentioned in the start were, let's say like leave of absence, childcare programs, free education. All this makes the people a better consumer, as Kunal rightly mentioned right now, because everything is taken care of. And he gave you a comparative example of US also, right? And it is only because they have a legal framework, or let's say like have made it over a period of time. They have not prospered in the last 2 years. They have been doing this for the last 25 to 30 years. And it's only over a period of time that the benefits kept on compounding, and now they have availed out on benefits.
I would just like to add on the fact that all the 3 Scandinavian nations, how much ever income tax or anything the money that goes to the government is used so optimally, and it's so efficient in their usage to increase the standard of living, as Kunal mentioned. Because as much as income tax is actually levied on you, you know that there are a lot of factors like, as I mentioned, the exemption on EVs and stuff. So your travel, your commute, your medical, and your education, all bare minimum necessities, it is taken care of. And it's not one remarkable thing that other governments around the world should actually look up to Scandinavian nations are that the governments use the funds brilliantly, like for everything that they actually do to uplift the standard of living. And as Lalit said, you know, he gave the railroad example, and you see there are other countries which actually spend 1,200 crores plus on repairing roads, which never, you know, tend to, you know, beneficially happen for the people. But then if the Scandinavian nations actually spend in this manner, it's all for the better standard of living that's going to impact the citizens for tomorrow.
All right, so that brings us to the end of the 14th episode of Converse. So to sum it up, we started our discussion with the economies of Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, and how one could compare the economy of Norway and Denmark, and then we progressed towards the topic that these countries have been able to successfully grow in spite of having high taxation systems, and then we progressed to why they have been able to do so because of the ease of doing business, the role of entrepreneurship in their country, the excellent labor policy that they have, and not just this, they care not just about their people, but they care about the environment as well, and how they have been, trying to do a revolution with respect to the electric vehicles in their country. So I hope this session was informative and inquisitive. And this is Taha Syed signing off until the next episode. So goodbye and take care.
Thank you, Mr. Taha. I would now like to invite Mr. Amit Raj, the coordinator of Converse, to come and give the vote of thanks.
Once a great man said, "Gratitude is a sign of noble souls." Good morning, all. I, Amit Raj, student coordinator of Converse Association, would like to thank all the panelists and give the formal vote of thanks. I consider the occasion as an honor and put the privilege to extend the vote of thanks. Today, I take the opportunity to put all my gratitude into words on the behalf of BCom Department and Converse. I would like to thank our moderator, Mr. Taha Syed, for taking his precious time and from out of his busy schedule and consenting to be the moderator of the day. Sir, indeed, your words have inspired the students, and I'm sure we all have learned a lot. Thank you for sharing the words of wisdom with us, sir. We have been fortunate to be guided by our principal, Reverend Dr. Charles Lasrado, for your constant support, and you have been us a lot of encouragement. Thank you, Father. I would also like to heartfully thank Dr. Sugandhi Pais, HOD of BCom Department, for her constant support and guidance. I would also like to thank Ms. Irene Vincent, the staff coordinator of Converse, for her constant support, enthusiasm, and motivation for making the Converse successful. I would also like to thank my assistant coordinator of Converse, Ms. Akansha, for coordinating with all the panelists and working hard for the event and making it a successful one. I would like to thank wholeheartedly our panelists for their efforts of making their panel discussion a successful one.